Hey there, fans of classic rock bands. This is Peter Sco from Music is a Journey. Today we're doing the second installment in our series of the first 10 albums of a particular band. And the band this time I find is really interesting because of all the bands that I know, this is the band that has the most outside contribution with regards to songwriting. I mean, usually in bands you have 1, 2, 3 songwriters, sometimes even the whole band gets involved. But with this band here, they had their producers, they had their friends, they had authors like poets and book authors. They had contributions from a lot of different people. And the band, of course, I'm talking about, you probably saw it when you clicked on it, is Blue Oyster Cult. So before we get into the 10 albums, let's just take a look at the background of the band a little bit here. It starts somewhere around 1967 when Donald Rosser and Albert Bouchard got together, and with some other guys they formed a band called the Disciples. And later on they changed the name to Travesty. But then, after a bit, they went their separate ways. Donald Rosser went off to Chicago to pursue a possible lead in music. But when that didn't really work out, he returned to New York and met up with Albert again. And by this time, they had gotten to know a fellow by the name of Sandy Pearlman. Now, Sandy Pearlman is an interesting figure and important in the history of the band. But he was a writer for a magazine called The Crawdaddy. And this was the first magazine, according to the Wikipedia article, the first magazine to write about rock and roll and its culture. There was also another fellow, an associate with him, associate of his called Richard Metzler, who would also be an important figure in the future of Blue Oyster Cult. So Albert and Donald, they teamed up with keyboard player Alan Lanier, and with a couple of other guys, they formed a band which started to get a lot of attention. And Sandy Pearlman thought, these guys might just be the band to bring my vision of an imaginary band to life. See, Sandy had written some poems about a character called the Imaginos, which was an alien character that was living here on Earth, and behind the scenes, Imaginos was influencing what was happening here on Earth. And there was a group of people, a secret group who knew about him, and they were called the Blue Oyster Cult. So he had this idea for an imaginary band, and they would sing songs about his story. So Sandy Pearlman came up with a name for the band, the Soft White Underbelly, and they started to get more and more attention. And through Sandy's contacts, actually, they were able to have somebody from Elektra come out and see the band perform. And he was so impressed, he signed the band right away. So they were going to record an album. Partway through the recording, or actually just nearly all the way through the recording, their singer, Les Brownstein, suddenly decided that he didn't want to go in this more heavier direction the band was going in. He was more of a psychedelic guy, and because of artistic differences, he decided to leave. So now here was Soft White Underbelly with an album just about finished, and suddenly their lead singer walked out. Well, as it so happens, earlier on when they had needed some equipment, they'd been given an advance from Elektra to get some equipment, and they were going to rent some PA equipment from a store, or from a rental agency, and the guy who was in charge of all that was a fellow named Eric Bloom. And when they went in to pick up their gear, they noticed a photo on the wall of a band called the Lost and Found. Now their singer, Les Brownstein, he had actually been in that band, and they knew about that, so they talked to Eric about it. And he said, yeah, he had been in the band as well, although apparently not at the same time as Les Brownstein. Things led to things, and a little bit later on, Eric Bloom and Alan Lanier were on a drive up to where I think Eric had been to college, and Alan met some of his college mates, and they said, you've got to hear Eric, and they played a recording of him when he was singing for the Lost and Found. So this was perfect timing. Alan thought, hey, this guy could just be the guy we need for our band. So Eric was asked to join, and he did. Now, the big problem was convincing Elektra to accept the new singer, and they had to kind of re-audition, and Elektra reluctantly agreed, okay, we'll go ahead, re-record some parts, and release the album with the new singer. However, there were some missteps along the way and some delays, and Elektra became frustrated with the band and decided to drop them. There had also been a case where one of the other band members, he was not comfortable with somebody who was hanging around in the band because of drugs, and he also quit the band. So now they had to replace 2 people, but they got Eric in for the vocals, and who could also take over on guitar as well. And then for bass, Albert Bouchard called in his brother Joe. So now we finally had the lineup of Donald Rosser, Eric Bloom, Alan Lanier, Joe Bouchard, and Albert Bouchard. Because of some recent bad reviews of a gig or two, Sandy Pearlman decided to change the name of the band. They were for a short time known as Oaxaca, but later on they came up with the name Stock Forest Group. And so now they were going to begin releasing, hopefully releasing an album of material as the Stock Forest Group, which is kind of interesting. However, Sandy Pearlman actually was friends with a guy named Murray Krugman who worked at Columbia Records. And so through Sandy's connection with him, they managed to get the Stock Forest Group a deal with Columbia Records. But it was decided that another name change was necessary. So Sandy Pearlman suggested the name Blue Oyster Cult, which was, of course, the cult in his story. At first, the members were not too keen on it, but they accepted it. And an interesting thing also is to point out that as the Stock Forest Group, they had each been given a stage name. However, 4 of the members completely rejected their name. Only Donald Rosser decided to keep his, which was Buck Dharma. So now he is almost equally known, as well known as Buck Dharma as he is as Donald Rosser. Anyway, there it was, and the Blue Oyster Cult was born. They had a deal with Columbia Records, and they went in to cut their first album. So on January 16th, 1972, the debut album, Blue Oyster Cult, was released. The lead single off this album here was Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll, with Albert Bouchard on vocals. It was actually early on that it was decided that there would not be one single lead vocalist. Eric Bloom took on most of the lead vocal duties, or at least the majority of them, but Donald Rosser usually appeared on a couple of songs, and Joe Bouchard and Alan Bouchard also appeared on a couple of songs. So at least 4 of the members were singing lead vocals on at least one track on these early albums. So it was Alan Bouchard who took on the lead vocals for Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll. And now that guitar riff for the song, actually it was inspired by the guitar riff for The Wizard by Black Sabbath. So let's just take a listen to it because you can kind of hear it. I think where Black Sabbath went high, low, high, Blue Oyster Cult went low, high, low. So let's just hear it now. The Wizard by Black Sabbath, the riff, and then the opening riff for Blue Oyster Cult, Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll. Here it is. So already right off the bat with the album, all the songs on the album were written by the band, as well Sandy Pearlman and Richard Meltzer contributed to the writing, and a fella named Harry Farkas, who had written a poem. Also, his work was used in the final track, Redeemed. The opening track, Transmaniacon MC, is actually about the Altamont Free Concert that was organized in California, which was supposed to be a kind of West Coast version of Woodstock. However, there were many problems along the way, and finally during the concert, there was some problem with an attendee, someone in the audience who got in some trouble with the security who were hired Hell's Angels, and he got rather pissed off, went off and came back with a revolver and threatened the security, and of course he got himself stabbed to death. There were also some cases with, I think, a motor vehicle accident and some deaths with drug-related, so it turned out to be really quite a disaster. So that's what inspired that opening track there. We also have the interesting, the appearance of the Blue Oyster Cult symbol here, which is actually, it was added on to the artwork by the artist Bill Golick, and this is actually an alchemical symbol for lead, which is interesting because lead is one of the heaviest of the heavy metals. So there was already here in 1972 this association with Blue Oyster Cult and heavy metal. Also because it looks a bit like a cross, but it also resembles the symbol for Saturn. There was this kind of perhaps religious connection, alchemical connection, mystique, the whole thing. So that has been an important symbol that has remained with Blue Oyster Cult, which is really cool. And in the beginning, the band just spelled their name normally, Blue Oyster Cult, but it was Alan Lanier who suggested putting the umlaut over the O in Oyster, and they were, as far as I know, the first band to do that. And this later on, you know, was taken up by other bands like Motorhead, Queensryche, Motley Crue, and even Spinal Tap, who put the umlaut over the N in Spinal Tap, which doesn't make any sense, but of course, you know, they were a parody group anyway. So that is from 1972, the debut. It's a groovy picture with Eric Bloom and a massive hairdo on the back there. The first album was not a perfect album, but got enough interest, and the band went ahead to do a second album, which was released on February 11th, 1973, actually. And here is curious because they're actually called the Blue Oyster Cult for this album here, which is interesting. And this is Tyranny and Mutation, the second album, and second also in the Black and White series. So here we have, again, Richard Meltzer is contributing some of the co-writing the lyrics here. And also we have the appearance of Patti Smith, who actually would co-write quite a few songs with Blue Oyster Cult. And she's here on a track called Baby Ice Dog, which is interesting because it starts out, the first line is, "I had this bitch, you see." Pretty interesting opening line for a song. The album was produced by Murray Krugman and Sandy Pearlman. Actually, Sandy Pearlman and Murray Krugman also did the first one. There was a song, Hot Rails to Hell, which was released as a single. And that is actually a pretty fast rocking song here. This album really stepped up the hard and heavy game. The first one still had some psychedelic influences in it. She's as Beautiful as a Foot. Lovely title. However, this one here, it started to move more into that kind of solid, heavy, hard rock direction. The opening track, The Red and the Black, was actually a sped up redo of a track off the first album, I'm on the Lam But I Ain't No Sheep, and is about a wanted man, a person wanted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, no less. This album here too, I find all of side 2, which is actually the red side, side 1 is the black side. The side 2 is just pretty much cool songs all the way through, and it ends with my favorite, Mistress of the Salmon Salt, Quick Lime Girl, which I really liked. So that is the second album. And now we'll move on to what some fans consider Blue Oyster Cult's best album. This is Secret Treaties, released on April 5th, 1974. This is also the third album in the so-called Black and White series, because all the album artwork is done in duotone, monotone, monochrome, however you want to call it. There was a poll. Melody Maker conducted a poll in 1975. This was declared in that poll the best rock album of all time. This is a pretty damn cool album. The opening song, Career of Evil, again co-written by Patti Smith. Subhuman. Some of the tracks on these albums also are related to the whole Imaginos Blue Oyster Cult story. The third track, Dominance and Submission, is one of my all-time favorite Blue Oyster Cult songs. I just really love the intensity and the heaviness of it, especially the guitar solo near the end. I also like how Eric Bloom can convey a kind of sense of approaching madness or losing control in Dominance and Submission, because near the end, the band sings Dominance and he sings Submission. But the band stays steady, always singing Dominance, and he starts off Submission. And as it continues, it's like Dominance, Submission. And it's like he's trying to keep himself from submitting, but finally at the end he's like, submission, submission, submission! And he does that on some other songs too. Like he's able to put that sense of madness in his voice, which I just love it. It's a kind of it really adds to the song, I think. We've got ME 626, which is a song about a German fighter craft, which is actually pictured on the front here. And there's another interesting thing about the lyrics in that song. There is a line about the English bombers coming in, and the line goes, They hung there dependent of the sky like some heavy metal fruit. So we see the term heavy metal coming in here again, only again not in reference to music, but actually to those bombers in the sky. Interesting image though. So Career of Evil was written by Patti Smith, but all the rest of the songs were written by Sandy Pearlman and Richard Meltzer, which is kind of interesting. The final track on here, Astronomy, that is one of the big ones in the Blue Oyster Cult catalog. Of course, never released as a single, but it is one that fans recognize. And what I find interesting is that a lot of times Alan Lanier's piano parts are kind of limited to just a bouncing single note, like in rock and roll style. But when he's given a chance to express himself a little more diversely on the piano, he does so very wonderfully. And I think that the intro to Astronomy is a lovely example of him kind of being given a chance to do a little bit more on the ivories. By now, Blue Oyster Cult were really starting to become quite a thing, and on May 21st, 1976, they released their fourth album, Agents of Fortune. This album is, of course, known for its single, Don't Fear the Reaper. And what's kind of interesting is that actually on the previous album, Secret Treaties, Donald Rosser didn't have any lead vocals, but he's the one who sang the lead vocals for Don't Fear the Reaper. Now, there's a very interesting thing about Don't Fear the Reaper. A lot of people have talked about it as that it is a song promoting lover suicide or suicide, and there's been a lot of statements made denying that. And Donald Rosser himself said that when he wrote the song, it was just that he was thinking about if he would die soon, and what would become of his relationship, and thinking about when you die, what becomes of your relationship. So that is reflected in the lyrics. Basically the man in the lyrics is facing death, and he's singing to or speaking to his female partner. But I find that this is Blue Oyster Cult, and they have a lot of songs which are kind of bordering on horror, or actually maybe even horror, like vampires and aliens. And so I've always had a different view of this song. You see, in the beginning, he's talking to his female partner and saying, if I'm going to die, we're going to be apart, but when you die, we will be joined together. And he makes this comment like 40,000 men and women every day redefine happiness, which I always really understand that 40,000 men and women every day maybe die together, not necessarily by suicide, but anyway, or one of them has passed away and then the other one passes away and they join up again and they spend forever together with their love and eternity. And I think that's what the message is in here. Romeo and Juliet, yeah, it's a tragic ending, but the two lovers end up in eternity together. And there's a kind of romantic image about Romeo and Juliet. But after the guitar solo, see, here's what's interesting in the song, is the song has, of course, that famous, very gentle feel to it, but the guitar solo suddenly gets very intense. And I feel that this is the moment where the man actually goes through his phase into death, and it's very dark and has a very ominous and very powerful feeling. The man is transitioning into the afterlife, and after that we return and we find the woman by herself now, and it is clear that she can't go on. It was clear that she couldn't go on. And then there's that whole image there, the curtains blew and he appeared, the candles blew and disappeared. The deceased lover has returned for her, and she takes his hand, and they fly out through the window together. Obviously, the two of them are on their way to spend eternity together, which means she too has also died. But we don't know how. It was clear that she couldn't go on. There's no suggestion that she took anything to end her life. But just at that moment, she felt such despair without him, and then he appeared and she went with him. So quite likely, she simply died of a broken heart, and in doing so, was able to join her lover together in eternity. And in that way, it has that kind of sweet romantic feeling of together forever, but it also has that horror image, of the apparition appearing and basically her being drawn to the apparition and leaving her corporal body behind. I don't know, I always thought about it that way, which just seems more like a kind of Blue Oyster Cult theme rather than just saying, I was just thinking about dying and what would happen, I think there's more to it than that. Anyway, let's see here what else. We have every member takes a lead vocal on this album. Alan Lanier has his one lead vocal, which is on the song True Confessions. I can't say that I think his vocals are absolutely brilliant, but for one song, it's all right. Then we also have The Revenge of Vera Gemini and Debbie Denise, which again features writing by Patti Smith. Also, Patti Smith does a spoken introduction to The Revenge of Vera Gemini and also takes in some vocals, supporting vocals. And one thing I find interesting about the song is that the chorus begins with a line, something like, "Oh no, no more horses, horses. We're going to swim like a fish." And to say "no more horses, horses" is interesting because Patti Smith's most famous album is called Horses. So I just wonder if there's some kind of connection like that. So Albert Bouchard actually takes co-writing credit for 5 tracks. Then 2 of them are with a woman named Helen Wheels. I actually looked her up. She was actually a woman named Helen Robbins, but she was nicknamed Helen Wheels. She was a friend of the band going right back to 1967 even. But their original keyboard player, was it, or bass player, she was either dealing with some drugs which he didn't like, or she was getting drugs from the pharmacy which he didn't like. But anyway, he was uncomfortable with her being so close to the band and with drugs going around, because in those days apparently the band kind of shied away from that kind of thing. So that's actually what made him quit, and they ended up getting Joe Bouchard in instead. So that was something I read about her. She also became a kind of a punk rocker. I think she released an album or a single. She released a single, and also a bodybuilder. And there was an illustration of her by R. Crumb, who is also the person who did the illustration for the Big Brother and the Holding Company album cover there, Cheap Thrills. Albert Bouchard also co-wrote 1 song with Murray Krugman and a fella named Don Walker, and then 2 with Patti Smith. Also, during these recording sessions, they recorded a song called Fire of Unknown Origin, but it was decided not to include it on the album, and so it turned up a few albums later on down the road. This album went platinum and was the band's biggest selling album to date. Also, at this time here, the band started using lasers, and I think were the first or one of the first bands actually to start using laser lights for their shows. However, the lasers often had problems. There was even a one show where only one of them worked, and there were complaints from people who had gone to the concert to see this fantastic laser light show with only one light working. In the end, after spending millions to get all this stuff, the band sold it all off because it was just too much of a hassle. But for a while there, they were using the laser light shows at their concerts there during Agents of Fortune and I think the next album, which now we'll move on to. The band's 5th album, Specters, was released in November of 1977. The cover photo, you can see the band sitting together there with their laser lights popping all around, which is why it has such a strange color to it. The big track off of here, of course, is Godzilla, which actually was not released as a single, but it was just picked up and played on radio. And in fact, the live version of Godzilla, which I think from Some Enchanted Evening, was the first Blue Oyster Cult song that I ever heard. It wasn't the one that got me interested in the band, but it was the first one that I heard. Because when I was a kid, I was really into Godzilla. And this guy here behind me, got him for my Christmas present in 1977. Another song on here, Golden Age of Leather, was written by Donald Roser and Bruce Abbott. And Bruce Abbott was actually a friend of the band, once again, going way back to 67. In fact, I think he was even with them when they were playing in the Disciples. Helen Wheels, again working together with Joe Bouchard on 2 tracks here, Nosferatu and Celestial Queen. Ian Hunter working together with Eric Bloom for Going Through the Motions. The album went gold, but did not reach platinum level, and this was the first time in the band's career that the sales actually went down from the previous album. Nevertheless, this is one of the band's more famous albums, of course thanks to Godzilla and some of the other tracks on here. Actually, I'd like to say a few words about the song Godzilla. I was checking a website about it earlier today. During the concerts, during the tours for this album here, they actually had a large animatronic Godzilla figure that came out spewing smoke. And in 1998, when the American Godzilla movie came out that starred Matthew Broderick, Oyster Cult were talking about if their song would be included in the soundtrack, and apparently the director decided to go with something more contemporary and included a song by P. Diddy the rapper instead. So Donald Rosser and Eric Bloom re-recorded the song with some changed lyrics, which included, "Oh no, say it isn't so, there's no Godzilla," and "millions spent on special effects, but our tune just ain't getting no respect." And apparently also during the tours for this album, they toured with Rush, and there would be some kind of spoken intro to the song Godzilla, and Rush actually switched the tapes around. So in one show at the beginning, when Godzilla was supposed to appear, suddenly the audience heard the voice, "Hello, I'm Mr. Ed." The Japanese spoken part in the middle of the song is actually an announcement, basically saying, "This is an emergency news announcement. This is an emergency news announcement. Godzilla is heading towards Ginza. Please seek shelter immediately." So there you go, if you didn't know that. And actually it's funny because I've listened to that so many times, I still couldn't figure out what they were saying until I looked it up on the internet. And I've been living in Japan for 23 years now. Specters was not as successful as Agents of Fortune. It had sold only gold. However, the follow-up live album, Some Enchanted Evening, had actually sold enough to reach platinum status. So the band were now encouraged once again that they could really put together an album to hit the charts. However, their longtime producer, Sandy Pearlman, had actually gone off to work for Black Sabbath. So they brought in a new fella named Tom Werner. And with him they decided, or maybe it was Tom Werner's idea more, I don't know, but they decided they were going to make an album that should really grab the attention of the music buying public and get them into the charts. So the result, on June 19th, 1979, the band released their sixth album, Mirrors. Unfortunately, Mirrors did not go the way that they had hoped. Some critics actually liked it, but the main criticism about the album was that it was just too polished. The band was trying too hard to become a chart-topping band rather than staying true to the concept that they had already established for themselves. I watched a video on a movie channel called OmniViewer, and the presenter there, he also had some unfavorable things to say about the album. I think it wasn't that it was just so particularly bad, it's just that there are things on here like female backing vocals and a song with a disco beat and some other things that just really seemed out of character. However, my honest opinion is that until now, you could expect to find such things on a Blue Oyster Cult album, because remember, we not only had 5 band members all writing, but we had outside members co-writing as well. I mean, we had Patti Smith singing background vocals on the song on the previous album, for heaven's sake, or 2 albums back. So I'm actually okay with what's going on here, but I have something I want to say honestly, that I was not going to buy Mirrors because I thought, oh, it must be such a terrible album. But when I finally got it, I was really impressed with the sound. And I think it's because I got this Legends of Rock special limited edition here, audiophile recording remastered in high definition. This sounds really good. And just last week when I was listening to all the albums from the beginning, all 10 albums that I'm talking about here in the video, when this one came on after Specters, I was just surprised. I mean, the guitar sound off the first track, Dr. Music, I just thought, holy crap, this is the guitar sound from Take Me Away from Revolution by Night. How cool is that? Now, I'd listened to this album, of course, a few times when I first got it, but that was a couple of years back now. And just a few of my favorites I still remember. So Dr. Music, okay, it does sound a bit, you know, it's late 70s, right? But it's not bad. It does have female backing vocals, but it does have a really cool guitar sound. So I think I'm just going to walk through some of the tracks here. The second track, The Grand Sun Jester, that's written by Eric Bloom, along with Michael Moorcock, who is a science fiction author, and a fella named John Trivers. This song takes us in a different direction. It's actually one of the songs that gets picked out as being one of the better ones off this album. The next track in I didn't hear anybody pointing it out specifically, but I think it's a very beautiful track. It's a very sentimental track. And actually, Alan Lanier, during the time that the band had been working together with Patti Smith on some of the songs, Alan and Patti had started dating. However, with all the constant touring of the band, the relationship was becoming strained, and that is what we hear in the lyrics of this song. It's written by Alan Lanier, and it's sung by Don Roser, but I think it's a very beautiful, bittersweet song about being on the road, being away from the person you love, and trying to console yourself somehow while still really wishing more than anything else you could be with that person. And eventually that is also what broke them up. And other members I read said that Alan had actually taken it really hard. But it was kind of inevitable. And Patti Smith herself said it wasn't that she had any bad feelings towards Alan. She understood that's how things were, and she's very thankful for what he brought into her life. That's third track. The fourth track mirrors the title track. Now this is one some people kind of don't like, and I can see why, because they do have these female vocals singing, but it's like this pretty girls don't look away. It sounds a little bit like, the hard rock Blue Oyster Cult is, working together with a kind of more pop flavor that just kind of mixes a little bit strange. But even still, I don't mind the song so much. I'm okay with it. We also have, let's see here, Moon Crazy, which is basically a piano rock song with a kind of southern guitar melody, which I really kind of pass over that one. But the beginning of side 2 opens with The Vigil, which is probably the coolest song on this album, I think. It's one of those Blue Oyster Cult songs. The theme is searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, extraterrestrial life. It's about being out there with your camera and watching the sky. But it's one of those songs that has that kind of like a heavier, darker feeling to it. And then it goes into this middle section. And I want to play something for you here, because there's this part that opens the middle section. Check it out. Okay, and now check out this from FM's debut album from 1977. Kind of similar in a way, maybe. Anyway, I really like that song. It's really cool. And the one that comes right after it, I Am the Storm, that's just a good, solid, hard, heavy, rocking Blue Oyster Cult song. Nothing wrong with that one. It's what you would expect from the band. So those two songs together are pretty cool. I think also I should point out that the song The Vigil was written by Donald Roser and Sandra Roser. I'm not sure who Sandra is. Was she his wife? Was she a sister? Was she a relative somehow? I'm not sure about that, but interesting point. And I Am the Storm was written by Joe Bouchard, along with a fella named Ronald Binder, I guess. Then we've got You're Not the One. Now, You're Not the One is written by Alan Bouchard and Karen Bouchard. And I was wondering, okay, who's Karen? We've got Sandra Roser. Who's Karen Bouchard? Well, the best I can find out, and maybe somebody out there will know this, the best I can find out is that she is their youngest sister. Apparently the Bouchard family had, I don't remember if it was 6 kids with 5 boys and 1 girl, or if it was 6 boys and 1 girl, but maybe it was 6 kids, 5 boys and a girl. So I'm guessing that that girl is Karen. And there was a photo I found on the internet showing one of the Bouchard brothers standing together with a Karen Bouchard. Well, a very attractive young lady. Nice looking girl. Anyway, You're Not the One I Was Looking For. I think it's just such a kind of cute song. It's actually a nice power pop type song. Maybe something you'd expect from a Cheap Trick album. It's got a whimsical side to it, but it's like, you're not the one I was looking for, but you're the one for me. Kind of cute like that. And then we finally get the last track, Lonely Teardrops, which is another Alan Lanier song. And I guess this is also reflecting his breakup with Patti Smith. And I expected it was probably going to be some lovesick ballad, a heartbreak ballad. But it's actually not bad. It's got this kind of, I guess this is the one with the disco beat. It sounds like, something you might hear on a late 70s Whitesnake album, or the what was it now, Pace Ashton Lord album, something along those lines there. But it's all right. It's all right. So actually, I don't mind this album. I don't see why it gets crapped on so much. And this one here with this audio, high definition audio remastering, it really sounds cool. In fact, I like the sound of this album better than I like the sound of Specters and Agents of Fortune, which means I probably need to get a high definition audio remastering of those albums as well. This brings us to Cultosaurus Erectus, which for some people is, I think some people have said that this was their introduction to the band and this was just a killer album that they loved. Now, coming to this album after Mirrors, the kind of commercial failure, I think the album barely reached gold or didn't quite reach gold. So something was needed, and so thanks to Sandy Pearlman being working with Black Sabbath, he hooked them up with Martin Birch, who of course had produced Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell album. He'd also worked with Deep Purple before, and later Iron Maiden, I think it was. So they got him in here to kind of bring back their darker sound. Honestly, my opinion is that this is not that darker. They've got a good couple of heavy songs like the Black Blade. It does have a kind of upbeat keyboard sound in there, but it does have this more sinister feel to the music, and of course is about this kind of blade that the possessor must use to kill, and it's from a character from a Michael Moorcock story, so Eric Bloom and Michael Moorcock working together on that one. I should also say this album was released on June 14th, 1980, and one interesting point is that because of the Black Sabbath connection, Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult actually went on tour together at this time for the Black and Blue tour, and that must have been quite a tour to see, because I understand that no matter how they sound on album, in the studio, you know, there may be efforts to make their studio productions a little bit more accessible somewhere along the way, but their live performances apparently are just more straight up heavy hard rock. Anyway, let's see here. Black Blade. We also have Monster, which is written, again, co-written with Karen Bouchard. This one here is pretty good. It's got this more heavier sound, but they do have these jazzy type saxophone breaks in there, which are interesting, but I just wonder how they fit in, because they've already got this really cool heavy atmosphere going on, and I just wonder, why did you choose to put those saxophone breaks in? They're fine on their own. How do they work together with the heavy guitars? Not sure. Maybe other people like it better. Divine Wind is an Eric Bloom song that just seems to be kind of long, actually, and so, you know, after listening to Mirrors, which once again I thought actually sounded pretty good, kind of wondering, what is all the excitement about this? Cool cover, though. But, you know, we get on to, what is next here? Deadline. Yeah, I wrote that I think Deadline sounds like a prototype song for the Club Ninja album. It's like they were warming up for that one with Deadline. Maybe it's okay. Marshall Plan, though, that's pretty cool. It tells the story of this young guy, Johnny, who wants to be a rock star and loses his girlfriend to a bunch of rock stars, and eventually he achieves his dream and becomes, you know, million album selling guy, with the introduction by Don Kirshner at one point in the song. And then we've got Hungry Boys, which, let's see here, that was also co-written with Karen Bouchard. I don't know, it sounds to me like a drug song. Whatever, so I'm actually not so keen on that. Fallen Angel on here, we have Helen Wheels, who we talked about previously. Again, she's working together with Joe Bouchard here. And Lips in the Hills, now this is actually one of the songs that I really like off this album. It's an Eric Bloom song, and it's got, again, the kind of more heavier, exciting sound with that mysterious image of the lips in the hills, up in the sky, an apparition. You know, pretty cool, I like that. And then the last one, The Unknown Tongue, is Alan Bouchard working together with a fellow named David Roter, I guess. I actually also like this song. It's again one of the other sides of Blue Oyster Cult, but still telling some kind of a story. This young woman, and talk about her breasts feeling hard, small and hard, but she cuts the knife across her wrist or her palm and tastes the blood, and next day she goes to school in a dress and patent leather shoes. Not sure what it's all about, but interesting. Now, the one thing is that, again, as I listened to these albums from the 1st to the 10th, after Mirrors with that audiophile, you know, remastering, this came on and it just sounded so flat, like the volume just dropped and the impact dropped, and I realized it's because I have an actual, like, this is a compact disc here, which means it's probably, you know, actually released way back. It's probably one of like the first issues of their albums on CD. So what I decided was that I actually had to get this Legends of Rock high audio remastering, which it just showed up in the mail today, so I haven't even taken it out of the plastic yet, but there it is. And because, you know, if Mira sounded good and then this one will hopefully sound better, it means I've also ordered this one too, and it's probably waiting for me to pick it up at work when I go in tomorrow. This, the band's 8th album, Fire of Unknown Origin, released June 22nd, 1981, again produced by Martin Birch. This is the band's biggest selling album, and honestly, I like it much more than Cultosaurus Erectus. I just find Cultosaurus Erectus. I just find that the music is just more gripping, more interesting for me on here. Now, I said this one here is also one of these, this is a compact disc, like early editions. When I was listening to these albums, I listened to Cultosaurus Erectus, and I got halfway through this one here and was thinking, yeah, I really got to get these on the remastered version. Next morning, I continued listening to the other half, and at that point, I had no, you know, previous thing to compare it to, so it sounded fine. So I don't know if it was totally necessary to repurchase this, but, you know, I'll find out. It's probably going to be worth it. Anyway, the big track off here is, of course, Donald Roser's Burning for You, and that's a great one. I think it's really good. It's got a really cool guitar sound, cool guitar riffs, but it's got these strong melodies as well. It's a really nice song. The opening track, let me see, what was the opening track? Oh yeah, Fire of Unknown Origin, which was, you know, originally recorded back in the Agents of Fortune sessions, now gets re-recorded here and appears. That's a pretty cool song. I love the line, like, death comes sweeping down the hallway like a lady's dress. Death comes driving down the highway. Those are just really cool opening lines to some of the songs here. I should also mention that Burning for You reached #1 on Billboard rock charts, and this album reached 24 on Billboard, so that was their highest charting album as well. A lot of the songs that were recorded here were actually recorded for the animated film Heavy Metal, for the soundtrack for that. And interestingly, the song that got used in the soundtrack in the end was actually not a song written for the soundtrack. Veteran of the Psychic Wars. The songs that were written were not actually used in the soundtrack, which is kind of curious. As kind of a side note, I was watching a film a video, someone was talking about the film Heavy Metal, and when he talked about this band, he called them the Blue Oyster Cult and the song Veteran of the Psych Ward. I wonder if he did that, you know, to be facetious, or if he really honestly made that mistake. So there was the song Vengeance, the Pact, which was actually telling the story of the Tarna sequence in the movie, which is near the end, which also, the beginning of that sequence features Black Sabbath with Mob Rules, which is pretty cool. Veteran of the Psych Ward is one of the songs that people really like to point out as one of the great songs off this album. My honest feeling about this album is that if you're 11, 12 years old and you haven't really gotten into hard rock yet, this is a great introductory album because it has some really cool guitar riffs and cool guitar sounds, but it still keeps up with some strong melodies. It does have the kind of more sinister aspect in places, the evil side, but it's not really too strong. It has some more straight up rock type songs, and it has some of the more epic ones that are telling a story. Veteran of the Psych Ward for me is a song that starts off with a lot of potential, but it kind of just stays in that framework all the way through, and I feel it never really develops into something that it could have developed into. So that's another reason why I feel it's kind of like really a good album for 11, 12-year-olds, because you hear that song and it's really different from the others, but at the same time it doesn't go like too far into, for example, progressive rock territory, which would, you know, confuse an 11 or 12-year-old most likely. Another song on here, Joan Crawford, was kind of a minor popular song. I think it's really cool because, as I said, you know, Eric Bloom has that way of giving that feeling of, you know, madness coming on. And there's that part. They have this whole thing here with all the sound effects, and then after that it quiets down, and then you hear this woman's voice, like an echoing, ghostly voice, Christina, mommy's home, or something like this. And then Eric starts, no, no, no. I think he could have been an actor, or at least a voice actor. I quite like that song, and I really like the opening description. Like, there's one line like, policemen hide behind the skirts of little girls, their eyes have turned the color of frozen meat. Some of these lyrics are just really, they just stand out, and I've never heard another band write lyrics like that. So yeah, actually very cool album. Let's see here, do we have anything else to say about this one? Yeah, we've got a lot of people working on here. Of course, Alan Lanier and Patti Smith had worked on Fire of Unknown Origin together way back when. We also have Richard Metzler, again contributing, Michael Moorcock, as we said, Liz Myers, John Trivers, Sandy Pearlman, Jack Ross, and David Roder. So, Roder. Sorry, David. David Roder. So quite a hefty load of people contributing to this one here. During the tour, Albert Bouchard suddenly started not showing up on time for gigs, and after a while they got I think it was the drum tech guy to come in and take over, and by the time the tour was over they had fired him from the band. Apparently Albert was out doing some soul searching. I don't know. And so actually at the end of this tour, the 8th album sees the end of the classic lineup of the band. We knew this was going to happen. This happens to every band just about. The story is getting long, but there are just so many interesting things to say about Blue Oyster Cult. So, for the 9th album, they got their guy, Rick Downey, who was covering for Alan Bouchard. They made him the drummer for their 9th album, Revolution by Night. They went off to Vancouver, to Little Mountain Studios, and met up with Bruce Fairbairn. Bruce Fairbairn, of course, a guy who established his name really big in the 80s with, you know, producing albums for Bon Jovi with Slippery When Wet, New Jersey, Aerosmith with Permanent Vacation and Pump, AC/DC's Razor's Edge album. He also produced the Loverboy albums, which went really big. So this was a guy with a big hefty name, and I guess they were looking to capitalize on the success of Fire of Unknown Origin, and they came out with Revolution, the Revolution by Night. I'm just going to say right off the bat that this is an album that really needs to get that audio file remastering, because I think this album would just sound so much better with it. The opening track, Take Me Away, that is the song that got me into Blue Oyster Cult. When I heard that, I thought, okay, I've got to pick up an album by this band. And disappointingly, it was the only song that was that heavy and hard rocking on the whole album. But it's a pretty cool song, and I love it with that middle section, which they always cut out when they played it on the radio. And apparently this was worked together, let me see here, with Eric Bloom and Aldo Nova, who was a Canadian musician who had some success there in the early 80s. So he had co-written the song and played some of the keyboards in the song there. Let's see here. We also had Eyes on Fire, which was written by a fellow named Greg Winter, or it was inspired by his writing anyway. And then we have Shooting Shark, which is based on a poem by Patti Smith. So Patti actually makes a comeback here on their 9th album. And actually, I really like Shooting Shark. It wasn't the kind of song I would normally be into at that time with saxophones, but I really love the melody, and Donald Roser has such a great voice for singing melodies. I just love that chorus part, and the story itself is actually pretty neat too. Veins is kind of interesting, but I didn't really like it so much for all the keyboards back then. I think listening to it now I might like it a bit better. Over on side 2 though, we have The Shadow of California, which mentions the Revolution by Night, and also there is a lyric in there that says The Symbol Remains, which was the title of Blue Oyster Cult's most recent album back from I think 2020. Kind of interesting that. Let's see, we also had Feel the Thunder, which is a kind of interesting story about 3 guys who get stoned and then ride out on the highway on their motorcycles and crash and then get judged by the fates, and they now must ride forever as like ghost riders on the highway. That's kind of like a real typical thing you would hear from Blue Oyster Cult, right? Let Go is just a kind of basic, rocker song to get you on your feet. B-O-C, you can be whatever you want to be. You got the power, we got the key, kind of thing. And Dragon Lady is, I never really thought it was all that great, but yeah, it's a pretty good rock song. The only song I never really got into was Light Years of Love, the closer, with all the really cool power ballads that were coming out in the 1980s. I just felt that one just didn't cut it. But this album here, once again, after a successful album, this one here, the sales were not what they were hoping for, and so now the band once again found themselves scrambling. What are we going to do? Just as they had done in the past after Mirrors. Sandy Pearlman would come back to produce the next album, but unfortunately, before then, Alan Lanier would quit the band, leaving us with now just 3 of the original band members. And that brings us to the final album in our top first 10 albums. Here it is, Blue Oyster Cult, Club Ninja, released December 10th, 1985. And this is also the lowest ranked of Blue Oyster Cult albums. And the guy I talked about before, Omniviewer, he just shakes his head about this album. Well, before I give my opinion, let's just see here. It was the hopeful comeback album. It was also the last album with Joe Bouchard, who would also leave the band after this. So, I mean, apparently during the tour, they were sometimes called 3 Oyster Cult. And after the tour, when Joe left, they were just called 2 Oyster Cult. Because by then, it was just down to Donald Roser and Eric Bloom, who, incidentally, are the only 2 remaining members today. This is actually also the only Blue Oyster Cult album to not feature Alan Lanier on keyboards. He did come back for the Imaginos project, and he showed up on the next 2 albums there around the turn of the millennium. Unfortunately, very sadly, he passed away in 2013, so he was never around for The Symbol Remains. So in Alan's absence, they brought in a fella named Tommy Zvonček to play keyboards. Yeah, let's take a look at the tracks now. Okay, so this was my second Blue Oyster Cult album. I bought Revolution by Night, and then I got this one when it came out. So, I didn't have all those impressions from, Fire of Unknown Origin, Cultosaurus Erectus, Specters, Agents of Fortune, Secret Treaties. I didn't have all those. I actually really liked the opening track, White Flags. Yes, there are going for that. I think what makes it 80s, 2 things, the drum sound and some of the keyboards that come in here. But one thing that I found really cool was that there is an organ in here, which just gives the song such power. And there's one part where the song just hits a kind of point of intensity, and then the organ just does this. Let me play it, see if I can get away with that. So I always loved that part. And, years after I got rid of the cassette, that song stayed with me, and it just made me think, finally one day, I've got to get this on CD again. So White Flags I really liked, and that was actually a cover song by a band called Leggett, a Canadian band with Hugh Leggett and his brother Gordon Leggett. Now, Hugh Leggett actually has his own legacy. He was going back to a band called Lords of London back in the 60s, which was kind of a very popish type band. But some of the members changed over to a band called Nucleus, started a new band, which was really an intense organ and electric guitar, progressive psychedelic type band, really cool. And then they, again, with some lineup change, went on to form A Foot in Cold Water, who had that song Make Me Do Anything You Want. So Hugh Leggett already had a kind of legacy going for him in Canada, and the Leggett album, if you listen to it, there are songs that sound like they're very suitable for Blue Oyster Cult to cover, and Blue Oyster Cult were actually interested in covering some of the songs, but the one that made it on this album here is White Flags. Next song is Dancing in the Ruins. This is, again, Donald Roser with a kind of upbeat rocker with some strong melodies. Supposed to hopefully have been another hit song, but I guess it wasn't really. Make Rock Not War and another song called Beat 'Em Up were written by a fella named Bob Halligan Jr. These are the 2 tracks that I actually don't really like so much on the album. They're okay, but I just find, Rock Not War, what are we fighting for? Just, you know, sounds like a really obvious type thing, and maybe something Blue Oyster Cult could have skipped over, but sometimes they do go for the obvious. Perfect Water with Donald Rosser, and this was also co-written by someone named Jim Carroll. Probably the standout track from the album that most people will cite as one of the songs worthwhile listening to from this one here. Spy in the House of the Night, yeah, that's kind of cool. When the War Comes features a spoken intro by Howard Stern. And Shadow Warrior, that's an interesting one. And finally, Madness to the Method as one of the songs I really like too, which has this Tommy Zvonček doing a lot of these piano parts in there, which I thought really cool. It has a very exciting dramatic ending. So overall, for me, actually, I quite like this album. But once again, this is most people's lowest ranked album, and one that they express a lot of disappointment with. My main disappointment is just some of the keyboard sounds just are, you know, really too mid-80s for my taste. But other than that, hey, I like it. So what happened after this? Well, the band kind of fizzled, and there wasn't really any kind of direction of what to do next. However, Albert Bouchard had been working on Sandy Pearlman's Imaginos concept and was putting together an album, which the record label said, we will not put it out as it is. We want to make it a Blue Oyster Cult album. And so that's where Eric Bloom, Donald Rosser, Alan Lanier came back again to work on the album and put their bits on, as well as a lot of other people. It's one of the two albums I don't have, but I've heard really good things about it from people. And of course the story continues on after that with getting up to the latest album from 2020, a couple of albums in between, also long gaps with just touring in between albums. But there you go. I think that turned out to be much longer than I expected. There's just so much to say about each album. But there you go, Blue Oyster Cult, the first 10 albums, my views. Okay, thanks for watching if you stuck all the way through to the end here. We'll catch you in another video sometime, everyone. Take care. Bye.